We've been saying that in a reading a lyric poem, one of the things you have to look for is the key word, a single word on which perhaps all of the meaning of the poem hangs. The most famous poem, probably, of William Butler Yeats is called Sailing to Byzantium. And here the key word is not the last word or in the last stanza. It comes right at the beginning, and if you miss it and go over it too fast, you have missed the meaning of the poem. It starts out by saying, "That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas," and so forth and so on. And then he goes on to say, "An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress." And then he says, "And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium." Now, the key word in that poem is that.
Why?
The very first word in the poem. Where is that? That is no country for old men.
Well, I would suppose Byzantium.
No, that's Ireland.
How would I know that?
Well, you've got to read carefully. That is no country.
I don't see anything in the text that would help me with
That is no country for old men, where the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations. And therefore, because that is no country for old men, I, an old man, have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium.
Do not challenge your analysis or your interpretation. I only wonder how one would come by it by normal steps.
The normal steps would be this. You would read it not knowing, thinking that that was Byzantium, and you would continue to be puzzled by the poem. And you would begin to recognize that the structure of the poem requires a description of two places, that and this. And then you would ask yourself, where is that? And you look back and see it's the first word. Sometimes the key word is not a word at all, but a whole line. And in a famous poem of Robert Frost's, this line has become very famous. It's called Mowing. "There was never a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. What was it whispered? I knew not well myself. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something perhaps about the lack of sound, and that was why it whispered and did not speak. It was no dream of the gift of idle hours or easy gold at the hand of fay or elf. Anything more than the truth would have seemed too weak to the earnest love that laid the swale in rows, not without feeble-pointed spikes of flowers, pale orchises, and scared a bright green snake. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows."
Read that again now.
The fact.
F-A-C-T?
"The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows, my long scythe whispered and left the hay to make." Now that line, "the fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows," has become very celebrated because it is the heart and soul of this poem. You know what it means?
No. No, I don't. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows.
One reason why it so clearly is important is because if you analyze it, examine it very carefully, all of the words in it and the grammatical constructions in it don't make any sense.
No, they don't.
A fact is not a dream. Labor doesn't know anything. Labor doesn't know a dream, which is in turn a fact, and so forth and so on.
Hence?
And yet there is a meaning to the statement, isn't there?
Well,
with regard to
I don't doubt it, but I don't know what it is.
With regard to labor, when you're working, the most satisfying thing about work is the work that you do. It is not the work that you have done. It is not the work that you anticipate doing, but labor has this curious quality about it that as you are working, the work itself is the satisfying thing about work. It's just it's the grass cut down. It's the swale of
word fact.
Yes, it is. It's very strange, and its very strangeness is what brings the line to your attention.
Surely. But I would never have understood it without this discussion.
But if you go on to read Frost very carefully, you find that many of his poems he's making this same point. Don't trouble me too much with rational considerations.
Charles, this little discussion we're having reminds me of a lecture I once gave many years ago, shortly after How to Read a Book was first published, which I said that I thought that solitary reading was almost as much a vice as solitary drinking, and this convinces me. If I read that poem by myself, I think I'd have given up. But this short discussion has carried me forward. And I think it's equally true of philosophy or anything else. Yeah. Reading books with other people, or having two people read the same thing and discussing it, heightens the reading many, many times. I really think solitary reading is not nearly as effective as communal reading.
It's true. I'm sure you're right. Nevertheless, there are many times when you have to read alone.
By yourself.
And you don't have
At least
anybody
once.
to share your reading with. But the point is that you've got to read terribly actively. You've got to seek for meaning,
Oh, sure.
even if you don't see it at first. And it's as though you join in a dialogue with yourself. You look in the poem for the key word, for the key line. You, as it were, fill in the blanks in the
I
poem.
suppose, taking that poem, if one started by asking the question, what can this line possibly mean? That question would get one to first base.
Exactly. That's the point. And you do something for the poem that the poem, on the surface at least, doesn't do for you.
Correct.
You have to put yourself into it. The same thing applies, I think, most truly to drama. You cannot read a poem, a play. The best way to experience a play is to see it. But many times you read a play, and you have to put something of yourself
You have to supply
into
your
that
own
too.
stage directions and your own direction, as a matter of fact, don't you?
Well, I'll show you. I've got a stage up here. This will be probably the only chance I'll ever have in my life to direct Hamlet, and I'm going to take it. I've got characters here. I'll call this the king. That's Hamlet's father, or his stepfather. The man who Hamlet has just discovered from the ghost of his own father has killed his father. This is Polonius, the prime minister. And not only the prime minister, but the father of Ophelia. Here's Hamlet. Polonius has been telling the king, he's been trying to explain why Hamlet has been acting so strangely. And he has been acting strangely. The audience knows this is because Hamlet has just seen the ghost, right? But, of course, the king doesn't know that yet. Polonius assumes that Hamlet is acting so crazily because he's in love with Ophelia. And he explains to the king about this. And the king is a little dubious and a little suspicious. So Polonius says to the king, well, you know, Hamlet walks in these galleries from time to time. And when he comes sometime, I'm going to loose my daughter to him. Now, that's a very striking phrase. And according to the old stage direction in the Elizabethan version of Hamlet, Hamlet does not enter until several lines later. But I believe, I take this idea from Dover Wilson, who wrote a book called What Happens in Hamlet, that Hamlet must have heard that earlier. And he must have been walking, say he's walking in this gallery up here. The audience doesn't see him for the moment, but Polonius is talking to the king, and Hamlet must come out here and suddenly start and notice what's going on, and then hear Polonius say, and I will loose my daughter to him, which he takes in a sexual as well as a social sense. He ducks back because the king may turn, and then the king is sent behind the heiress over here by Polonius, and Hamlet comes out, and they meet. And
The king is sent there by Polonius,
in order
to overhear the conversation.
In order to overhear the conversation. And we can read that conversation.
Let's do that.
Homer. And you'll understand why it is so important, even though the old stage direction didn't say it, for Hamlet to have overheard those previous words. Enter Hamlet reading.
Oh, give me leave. How does my good lord Hamlet?
Well, God a mercy.
Do you know me, my lord?
Excellent well. You are a fishmonger.
Not I, my lord.
Then I would you were so honest a man.
Honest, my lord?
Aye, sir, to be honest as this world goes is to be one man picked out of 10,000.
That's very true, my lord.
For if the sun breed maggots in a dead dog, being a god-kissing carrion, have you a daughter?
I have, my lord.
Let her not walk of the sun. Conception is a blessing, but not as your daughter may conceive. Friend, look to it. And then the scene, of course, goes on, and there's wonderful things that happen in it. But the things that Hamlet says to Polonius are inexplicable unless he has overheard that previous remark. When he says, for example, let her not walk to the sun, the word is spelled S-U-N in the old versions, but this was a common Elizabethan pun. Sun's spelled S-U-N and S-O-N.
Yeah.
And that is to say, let her not get too close to the sun, who is me, because I am the son of the king. Conception is a blessing, but not as your daughter may conceive. If you loose her to me, she may conceive out of wedlock, you see. And when he refers to, when he says this thing to Polonius, I take you for a fishmonger, I know you're a fishmonger, whoremonger is the word
Yes.
that would have been in everybody in the Elizabethan audience's mind. Now, that sort of little thing, I think, is always necessary to do whenever there's any kind of puzzlement in a play of Shakespeare or anybody else.
Staging it.
You must stage it, and if you had a stage like this, it would help
Well,
a
you
great
can do it
deal.
in your imagination. You don't have to have it as elaborate as this.
I'll do another one now. The end of King Lear has always been rather puzzling to people. King Lear is dead. Can you see his name there? Yeah, that's King Lear. He's lying there. I'll take this sign that means this is the king and make him the Duke of Albany. The Duke of Albany is standing here. And this is Kent, the old servitor of King Lear, and this is Edgar, who is the son of the Duke of Gloucester. King Lear is dead, Cordelia is dead, the story is over, but there's a little wind-up. And Kent says, Albany first says, he's the inheritor of the whole thing, you see, he's the son-in-law and so forth, he's the, he says, we're going to have to rule this kingdom from now on. Kent says, I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no. Now, his master is
dead.
King Lear, but he's dead. And so he is saying, he is calling me to death. I'm an old man, and I have no more career ahead of me. Albany then, in the last words of the play, says, the weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. Now, who's the oldest?
Lear.
No, it's not Lear. Lear is dead.
Oh.
It's Kent.
Kent, yes.
It's clearly Kent. Now, but most audiences miss that, and many directors miss it. So Albany would be required to point in some way toward Kent, or make a gesture toward him, and the oldest, or nod toward him, or bow toward him when he says this. If you don't do that, the play ends in a kind of confusion.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing is what I have in mind when I say that you should direct the play. I like to think that the director's role, in the case of a play, is the general role of the reader in reading any work of this kind.
But it sometimes takes great skill. For example, in reading the Greek tragedies, where there are almost no stage directions at all, just enter and exit, it is very hard to often imagine exactly how the characters, the leading characters, confront one another.
Well, that's true, but nobody ever said that reading was easy. Reading is very hard. If it weren't hard, it wouldn't be worth doing.
Correct.
And the better the work that you're reading, the harder the work is, and therefore the more satisfying the result.